I was sitting in my home office in Gilbert, Arizona, staring at the certified letter from the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association when my phone rang for the third time that morning. The letter accused me of violating community guidelines by installing an unauthorized roof color, demanding I replace the entire thing within 30 days or face daily fines of $250. My blood pressure spiked as I picked up the phone, already knowing who was calling. "Mr. Kellerman, this is Patricia Henderson from the HOA board. I'm calling to follow up on the violation notice you should have received by now." Her voice dripped with that particular brand of satisfaction that only comes from catching someone in what she perceived as wrongdoing. Patricia was the quintessential HOA board president. A woman in her late 40s with blonde highlights that looked like they cost more than my monthly utilities, always wearing pastel blazers, and carrying a leather-bound copy of the CC and Articus like it was sacred scripture. "I got your letter, Patricia," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "but there seems to be a mistake. My roof color was approved." "I don't think so, Mr. Kellerman. The approved color palette for our community includes desert sand, adobe clay, and terracotta sunset. Your roof is clearly bronze ember, which is not on the list." She said this like she was reading from a legal document, each word carefully enunciated. "Patricia, I submitted all my paperwork before the installation. I have the building permit from Maricopa County, and I have the architectural approval form that was signed by the HOA board 6 months ago." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I have no record of any such approval. And as board president, I would certainly remember approving bronze ember. It's far too dark and creates an eyesore in the neighborhood." "An eyesore?" I stood up from my desk, frustration building. "I've had 3 neighbors compliment me on it. And whether you remember it or not, I have the signed approval form. I followed every single rule." "Well, Mr. Kellerman, if you truly have this mysterious approval, I suggest you provide it to the board within 7 days. Until then, the violation stands, and if the roof is not replaced by the deadline, the daily fines will begin accruing. Good day." She hung up before I could respond. I threw the phone onto my desk and pulled up the file cabinet where I kept all my home improvement documents. I had lived in Saguaro Heights for 3 years, and in that time, I had learned to document everything when it came to the HOA. Every conversation, every email, every piece of paper. When I decided to replace my aging roof last summer, I had been meticulous about following the proper procedures. The file was thick, filled with receipts, contracts, and permits. I found what I was looking for near the front. A signed architectural approval form dated February 15th of the previous year. The form clearly stated that I was approved to install a new roof in the color bronze ember, manufactured by Atlas Roofing Corporation. At the bottom of the form were 3 signatures from HOA board members. One of them was Patricia Henderson's own looping script. My wife Jennifer had warned me about Patricia when we first moved in. "She's the kind of person who measures the height of everyone's grass with a ruler," Jennifer had said after our first neighborhood barbecue. "Just stay off her radar." But staying off Patricia's radar was impossible when you actually wanted to maintain your property. Jennifer was out of town for the week, visiting her sister in Portland, and I knew she would tell me to handle this carefully. I scanned the approval form and the building permit into my computer, then sent copies to the HOA board's official email address with a detailed explanation. I also made an appointment to attend the next board meeting, which was scheduled for the following Thursday evening. If Patricia wanted to play games, I would show up with evidence and witnesses. The week dragged by slowly. I continued getting calls and letters from the HOA, each one more threatening than the last. Patricia apparently had a lot of time on her hands because she drove by my house at least twice a day, slowing down to stare at my roof like it had personally offended her. My neighbor to the left, an older gentleman named Robert Chen, came over on Wednesday afternoon. "Tom, what's going on with Patricia and your roof?" Robert asked, standing on my driveway with his hands in his pockets. "She came by yesterday asking me if I was bothered by your roof color. I told her it looked fine to me, but she kept pushing, asking if I thought it was too dark or if it bothered me when the sun hit it. She's claiming I never got approval for the color, even though I have the signed form proving I did," I explained. "She signed it herself." Robert shook his head. "That woman has caused more problems in this neighborhood than the actual problems she claims to be solving. Last year she tried to fine the Martins for having a vegetable garden in their backyard because she said it attracted pests. Their backyard, where no one could even see it except from their own windows. What happened with that? They fought it, provided evidence that their garden was compliant with county regulations and wasn't causing any issues. Eventually the board backed down, but only after the Martins threatened to sue. Patricia didn't speak to them for 6 months. Robert glanced at my roof. "Your color looks great, by the way. Very professional installation. When did you get it done?" "Last summer. June through July. Had to wait for the monsoon season to pass before they could finish. And Patricia approved it back in February, according to the form I have, yes, along with 2 other board members." Robert nodded slowly. "You know, Patricia replaced the entire board about 8 months ago. There were 5 members including her, and she managed to get 3 of them to resign through various means. Then she appointed her friends to fill the positions. I wonder if the people who originally approved your roof are even on the board anymore." That was an interesting piece of information. "Do you remember who was on the board back in February last year?" "Let me think. There was Patricia, obviously. Then Michael Yamamoto, Susan Chen, no relation to me, Gregory Foster, and Linda Martinez. But by September, Michael, Susan, and Gregory had all resigned. Now it's Patricia, Linda, and 3 new people, Deborah Walsh, Margaret Thompson, and Carol Jenkins." I wrote down the names. "Do you know why they resigned?" "Michael moved out of state for work, but Susan and Gregory both left after conflicts with Patricia. Susan told me Patricia was impossible to work with, always overruling the other board members and making decisions without consensus. Gregory apparently had a big argument with her about enforcement priorities. He thought they should focus on actual problems like speeding in the neighborhood and broken streetlights, but Patricia wanted to spend all their time measuring mailbox heights and checking paint colors. This was getting more interesting. Would Susan or Gregory be willing to talk to me about the approval they gave me? I can give you Susan's number. She still lives in Gilbert, just moved to a different neighborhood. Gregory moved to Scottsdale, but I think I have his contact information somewhere." Robert provided me with the contact details, and I spent Wednesday evening reaching out to the former board members. Susan Chen responded to my text within an hour, and we arranged to meet for coffee on Thursday morning before the board meeting. Susan was a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in business casual attire, and she seemed relieved to talk about her experience with the HOA board. We met at a local coffee shop in downtown Gilbert, and she ordered a large iced coffee before settling into a chair across from me. "Tom, I remember your approval very clearly," Susan said once I explained the situation. "You submitted a comprehensive packet with photos of the proposed roof color, the manufacturer's specifications, and a letter from your roofing contractor explaining why bronze ember was a good choice for Arizona's climate. The board reviewed it in February, and we all agreed it fell within the acceptable range of earth tones that complement the desert aesthetic of the neighborhood. Patricia is now claiming she has no record of the approval and that bronze ember was never authorized, I said, showing her the violation letter on my phone. Susan's expression darkened. That sounds exactly like something Patricia would do. When I was on the board, she would constantly lose documents that contradicted her positions. We were supposed to maintain digital records of all approvals and decisions, but Patricia controlled the email account and the file system. After I resigned, I heard from Linda that Patricia had reorganized everything and supposedly archived old files to make room for new records. Archived or deleted? That's the question, isn't it? Susan pulled out her own phone. When I left the board, I backed up all the emails and documents I had received during my tenure. I know I shouldn't have kept them, but something told me they might be important. Let me check. She scrolled through her phone for several minutes, then turned it toward me with a triumphant smile. Here. Email from February 16th, sent to all board members, confirming the approvals from that month's meeting. Your roof is specifically mentioned. Approved architectural request for Thomas Kellerman, 4782 East Desert Willow Drive, new roof installation in bronze ember color. The email was sent by Michael Yamamoto, who was the board secretary at the time. I took photos of her phone screen, making sure the email header with the date and recipients was clearly visible. Susan, would you be willing to come to tonight's board meeting and speak about this? She hesitated. Tom, I left the board because Patricia made it a toxic environment. I don't really want to get back into it. I understand, but Patricia is threatening to fine me hundreds of dollars a day for following the rules I was given. If this works on me, she'll do it to other homeowners. You said Gregory left because he was worried about enforcement priorities. This is exactly the kind of abuse of power he was concerned about. Susan considered this for a long moment, sipping her coffee. All right, I'll come, but I'm only speaking to the facts of the approval. I'm not getting into a debate with Patricia about board politics. That's all I need. Facts and documentation. I spent the rest of Thursday preparing for the evening board meeting. I printed multiple copies of the architectural approval form, the building permit from Maricopa County, the email Susan had shown me, and a timeline of events. I also printed the county regulations regarding roof installations and the HOA's own CC and Artiques, with the relevant sections highlighted. Jennifer called me from Portland around noon. How are you handling the Patricia situation? She asked. She knew me well enough to hear the stress in my voice when we had talked earlier in the week. I'm going to the board meeting tonight. I have all the documentation proving I got approval, and I found one of the former board members who remembers approving my request. She's coming to the meeting to back me up. Be careful, Tom. Patricia doesn't strike me as the type to admit when she's wrong. She'll find some way to twist this. Let her try. I followed every rule and I have proof. I know you did, but people like Patricia don't care about the rules when it's convenient for them to ignore the rules. Just don't let her get under your skin. Jennifer knew me too well. I had a tendency to get heated when I felt I was being treated unfairly, and Patricia was exactly the kind of person who could push those buttons. I'll stay calm. I'll just present the facts and let the documentation speak for itself. Good. Call me after the meeting. I want to hear how it goes. The HOA board meeting was held at a community center within the neighborhood, a small building that also housed a gym and a pool facility. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a folder with all my documentation. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and several rows of chairs for residents. About a dozen people were already there, some clearly present for specific issues and others just interested community members. Patricia arrived exactly at 7 o'clock, flanked by the other 4 board members. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer and had her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. When she saw me sitting in the front row, her expression hardened slightly, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Linda Martinez, the only remaining board member from my approval period, gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. The meeting began with standard procedural items: approval of the previous meeting's minutes, treasurer's report, updates on neighborhood maintenance issues. Patricia ran the meeting with military precision, cutting off anyone who spoke too long and redirecting conversations that strayed from the agenda. When they finally reached the section for architectural violations, Patricia's posture straightened. "We have several ongoing violations to discuss," Patricia began, looking down at her notes. "First is the matter of 4782 East Desert Willow Drive, the Kellerman residence. Mr. Kellerman installed a roof in an unauthorized color last summer and has been given notice to replace it with an approved color within 30 days. I raised my hand. I'm here to address that issue." Patricia looked at me with barely concealed annoyance. "Mr. Kellerman, residents are allowed to speak during the public comment period at the end of the meeting. This directly concerns a violation notice I received. I thought it would be more efficient to address it now while you're discussing it." There was a murmur of agreement from some of the other residents. Patricia glanced at the other board members, clearly weighing whether to push back. Linda Martinez spoke up. "Patricia, I think it makes sense to hear from Mr. Kellerman now since we're already on the topic." Patricia's jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. "Fine. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Kellerman." I stood and walked to the front of the room, handing out copies of my documentation to each board member. "Thank you. I'm here because I received a violation notice claiming I installed my roof without proper approval. However, I have clear documentation proving that my roof color was approved by this board in February of last year." I held up the architectural approval form. "This is the signed approval form, dated February 15th. It specifically authorizes a roof installation in bronze ember color. You'll see 3 signatures at the bottom, including yours, Patricia." Patricia barely glanced at the paper. "I don't recall signing this, and we have no record of it in our current files. Whether you recall it or not, your signature is on the document. I also have the building permit from Maricopa County, which was issued based on the HOA approval." I held up the permit. "The county doesn't issue building permits without HOA approval in deed-restricted communities. They verified with the HOA that my plans were acceptable." Margaret Thompson, one of the newer board members, leaned forward to examine the documents. "These look legitimate." "Patricia, do we have any record of this approval in our system?" "No, we don't," Patricia said firmly. "And I find it suspicious that Mr. Kellerman produces these documents only after receiving a violation notice. If he truly had approval, why wasn't it in our files?" "Because you reorganized the filing system after Susan Chen, Michael Yamamoto, and Gregory Foster left the board," I said, keeping my voice level. "Susan Chen is actually here tonight and can speak to the approval." Susan stood from her seat near the back of the room and came forward. Patricia's face flushed when she saw her former colleague. "Susan, what a surprise." "Patricia," Susan's voice was cool, "I'm here because Tom asked me to verify the approval we granted his roof installation. I was on the board when we reviewed his request, and I remember it clearly. We all agreed that bronze ember was an acceptable earth tone that fit the neighborhood aesthetic. I still have the email confirmation that Michael sent after that meeting." She held up her phone, showing the email to the board members. Linda Martinez nodded. I remember that meeting too. We had several architectural requests that month, and Tom's roof was one of them. We approved it without any concerns. Patricia's composure was starting to crack. Even if there was some prior approval, the current board has the authority to revoke approvals that don't align with community standards. Actually, you don't, I said, pulling out a highlighted copy of the CC and Articus. Section 7. Paragraph 3 states that architectural approvals, once granted, cannot be retroactively revoked unless the homeowner made material misrepresentations in their application or deviated from the approved plans. I submitted accurate information, and my roof was installed exactly as proposed. The county permit proves that. Deborah Walsh, another board member, spoke up. Patricia, if the approval was properly granted and the homeowner followed the approved plans, I don't see how we can enforce a violation. We would be changing the rules after the fact. The rules haven't changed, Patricia insisted. The approved color palette has always been desert sand, adobe clay, and terracotta sunset. Bronze ember is not on that list. The color palette is a guideline, not an exhaustive list, Linda said, her voice firm. We've always had discretion to approve colors that fit the general aesthetic, even if they're not specifically named. Bronze ember is a dark bronze with red undertones. It's basically a variation of terracotta sunset. I could see Patricia realizing she was losing control of the situation. I still have concerns about the precedent this sets. If we allow homeowners to deviate from the stated color palette, we'll have chaos. It's not deviation if it was approved, Susan said sharply. Patricia, you need to admit that the board made an approval. Tom followed all the rules, and this violation notice is unjustified. The room was silent for a moment. Other residents were watching the exchange with keen interest. Finally, Carol Jenkins, the fifth board member who had been quiet throughout the discussion, spoke. I move that we rescind the violation notice for Mr. Kellerman's property. The documentation clearly shows proper approval was obtained, and the installation complies with that approval. I second that motion, Linda said immediately. Patricia looked like she had swallowed something bitter. All in favor? 4 hands went up. Linda, Carol, Deborah, and Margaret. Patricia's hand remained down, but the vote was decided. The motion passes, Patricia said through gritted teeth. The violation notice is rescinded. Thank you, I said, gathering my documents. I appreciate the board's time and attention to this matter. As I returned to my seat, several residents nodded approvingly at me. Susan caught my eye and gave me a small smile before leaving the meeting. The rest of the agenda proceeded without incident, though Patricia's mood had noticeably soured. She rushed through the remaining items and adjourned the meeting 20 minutes earlier than usual. As people filed out of the community center, Robert Chen caught up with me in the parking lot. Well handled, Tom. Patricia was clearly trying to steamroll you, but you came prepared. I learned early on to document everything with this HOA, I said. I'm just glad Susan was willing to come and back me up. You should know that Patricia isn't going to let this go, Robert warned. She doesn't like being contradicted, especially in public. Watch your back. I thought Robert might be exaggerating, but over the next few weeks, I realized he was absolutely right. Patricia began what could only be described as a harassment campaign. Every few days, I would receive a new violation notice for increasingly petty issues. My trash cans were supposedly visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, a violation I knew was false, because I always brought them in within an hour of the truck coming. My front yard rocks were allegedly the wrong shade of desert landscaping stone, even though they were the same rocks that had been there when I bought the house. My mailbox was supposedly 2 inches too tall, even though it had never been an issue before. Each violation notice required a written response and supporting documentation. I took photos, provided receipts, and submitted detailed rebuttals. Every single violation was eventually dismissed by the full board, usually with Patricia as the sole dissenting vote. But the process was exhausting and time-consuming. Jennifer had returned from Portland and was furious at the ongoing harassment. "This is ridiculous, Tom," she said one evening in late February as I prepared yet another response to a violation notice, this one claiming our house numbers were not the correct font. "Patricia is clearly retaliating against you for embarrassing her at the meeting." "I know. But as long as I respond to each notice and provide evidence, the board keeps dismissing them. She can't actually fine us if the violations aren't real." "But how long can this go on? She's going to keep finding new things to complain about until you either give up or move." That thought had crossed my mind too. "I'm not moving. We love this house and we did nothing wrong. Patricia is the one breaking the rules, not me. Maybe you should file a complaint against her. If she's abusing her position to harass homeowners, that has to violate something." Jennifer had a point. I started researching the HOA's governing documents and Arizona state law regarding HOA board conduct. It turned out that board members had a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the community, not pursue personal vendettas. I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board, documenting the pattern of false violation notices and asking for an investigation into Patricia's conduct. I submitted the complaint in early March, sending copies to all 5 board members and the HOA's management company, which handled administrative tasks for the association. Within a week, I received a call from Margaret Thompson, one of the board members who had supported me during the roof color dispute. "Tom, I wanted to talk to you about your complaint," Margaret said. "I want you to know that I take it very seriously. So do Linda, Carol, and Deborah. We've noticed the pattern of violation notices you've been receiving, and we've been concerned about it." "I appreciate that, Margaret. I'm not trying to cause problems, but Patricia's behavior has crossed the line from thorough enforcement into targeted harassment." "I agree. The 4 of us have discussed this, and we're going to address it at the next board meeting. We may need you to attend and present your evidence, similar to what you did with the roof issue." "I'll be there. And I have documentation of every false violation notice, every response I provided, and every dismissal by the board." The March board meeting had a much larger turnout than usual. Word had spread through the neighborhood about the ongoing conflict between Patricia and me, and many residents were curious to see how it would be resolved. Patricia seemed surprised by the crowd size when she arrived, and she appeared even more surprised when the meeting agenda included an item titled "Discussion of Board Member Conduct." The meeting followed the usual procedural opening, but there was a tension in the room that hadn't been present before. When they reached the conduct discussion item, Linda Martinez took the lead instead of Patricia. "We have received a formal complaint from a resident regarding potential abuse of power by a board member," Linda began, her voice clear and professional. "The complaint alleges that violation notices have been issued as retaliation rather than legitimate enforcement of community rules. The board has a duty to investigate such allegations impartially." Patricia interrupted. "This is clearly a personal attack by Mr. Kellerman because he didn't like being held accountable for his violations." "Patricia, you'll have an opportunity to respond, but please don't interrupt," Linda said firmly. "Tom, would you like to present your complaint? I stood and distributed copies of my documentation package to the board and interested residents. Over the past 6 weeks, I have received 8 violation notices from the HOA. Every single one has been initiated by Patricia Henderson. Every single one has been dismissed by the full board after I provided evidence showing the alleged violation was either false or not actually a violation of the rules. The timing of these notices, beginning immediately after the board rescinded Patricia's roof color violation, suggests a pattern of retaliation. I walked through each violation notice in detail. The false claim about trash cans being left out, which my doorbell camera footage disproved. The complaint about landscaping rocks, which matched the original installation by the home builder and were present in dozens of other homes in the neighborhood. The mailbox height issue, which a professional measurement showed was identical to the standard height approved in the CC and Articus. For each notice, I showed the original complaint, my response, and the board's dismissal. This isn't about accountability, I continued. This is about a board president who didn't like being proven wrong and is using her position to harass a homeowner who stood up to her. That's an abuse of power and a violation of her fiduciary duty to the community. Margaret Thompson spoke next. Patricia, how do you respond to these allegations? Patricia's face was flushed and her voice was sharp. I respond by saying that Mr. Kellerman is exaggerating minor administrative issues to create a narrative of victimhood. As board president, I have a responsibility to enforce our community standards, and if Mr. Kellerman is constantly violating those standards, he should address his own behavior rather than attacking me. But the violations were false, Deborah Walsh pointed out. Tom provided clear evidence that he wasn't violating any rules, and the timing is suspicious. You issued 8 violation notices in 6 weeks, all to the same homeowner, all immediately after he successfully challenged your roof color violation. That doesn't look like routine enforcement. Are you accusing me of lying? Patricia's voice rose. I'm saying the evidence suggests these notices were not issued in good faith, Deborah replied calmly. Carol Jenkins added, I've been reviewing the violation notices issued over the past year. Before January, Tom received no violation notices at all. Neither did most residents. But starting in January, right after the roof color issue, Tom has received 8 notices while the rest of the neighborhood combined has received maybe 10. That statistical disparity is hard to explain as anything other than targeting. Patricia stood abruptly. I don't have to sit here and be accused of misconduct by people who don't understand the responsibilities of leadership. I have dedicated countless hours to this community, and this is the thanks I get. Linda's voice was gentle but firm. Patricia, no one is questioning your dedication, but we have to take allegations of abuse of power seriously. The documentation Tom provided is concerning, and the pattern is clear. I think we need to vote on whether to launch a formal investigation. You can't investigate me. I'm the board president, Patricia said. The board president is still accountable to the board and the community, Linda replied. In fact, Arizona Revised Statute Section 3318-13 specifically provides mechanisms for removing board members who breach their fiduciary duties. I was surprised Linda knew the specific statute, but I was grateful for it. Patricia seemed shocked that another board member would cite law against her. She looked around the room, perhaps expecting support, but the other board members looked resolute. I move that we open a formal investigation into the violation notices issued to Tom Kellerman, and whether they represent an abuse of power, Margaret said. I second, Carol said immediately. The vote was 4 in favor, with only Patricia voting against. Patricia sat down heavily, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. Over the next several weeks, the board conducted their investigation. They reviewed all the violation notices Patricia had issued over the past year, not just to me but to all homeowners. They interviewed several residents about their interactions with Patricia. They examined the process by which violation notices were supposed to be issued according to the HOA's procedures. What they found was damning. Patricia had been unilaterally issuing violation notices without bringing them to the board first, which was contrary to the established procedure. She had been selectively enforcing rules, targeting homeowners she had personal disputes with while ignoring identical issues at properties owned by her friends. And in my case, the evidence clearly showed that every violation notice issued after January was either factually wrong or represented an interpretation of the rules so strict that it would require dozens of other homeowners to also be in violation. The board presented their findings at the April meeting. The community center was packed, with standing room only. People had heard that there would be significant developments, and the neighborhood gossip mill had been working overtime. Patricia sat at the board table looking pale and drawn. She had brought her husband, a quiet man named Richard who looked deeply uncomfortable with the proceedings. Linda Martinez presented the investigation findings in a clear, factual manner, avoiding emotional language but making the conclusions unavoidable. Based on our investigation, we have found that Patricia Henderson has violated her fiduciary duty as board president in multiple ways. She has issued violation notices without board consultation, selectively enforced rules based on personal relationships, and engaged in a pattern of retaliatory conduct against Tom Kellerman. While we believe Patricia's initial intentions may have been to maintain community standards, her methods and selective application of those standards constitute an abuse of power. Patricia started to speak, but Linda held up a hand. "Patricia, you'll have an opportunity to respond, but please let me finish." The investigation also revealed that Patricia has been controlling access to the HOA's financial accounts in a manner inconsistent with proper oversight. While we found no evidence of financial misappropriation, the lack of transparency is concerning and contrary to Arizona law requiring HOA financial transparency. That was news to me. I had focused on the violation notices, but apparently the investigation had uncovered other issues. Margaret Thompson continued the presentation. "We are recommending several actions. First, that Patricia Henderson be removed as board president, effective immediately. Second, that a full financial audit be conducted by an independent accountant. Third, that the board implement new procedures for issuing violation notices that require review by at least 2 board members before notices are sent to homeowners." The room was silent. Patricia's face had gone from pale to red. "You can't remove me. The homeowners elected me to this position." "Actually, the homeowners elected you to the board, and the board elected you as president," Linda corrected. "And the board can remove you from the president position by majority vote. Your position as a board member would remain unless the homeowners vote to recall you, which would require a special election." "I move that Patricia Henderson be removed as board president," Margaret said. "I second," Deborah said. The vote was 4 in favor, 1 against. Patricia had been removed as president. Linda Martinez was elected as the new president in a unanimous vote of the remaining 4 board members, with Patricia abstaining. Patricia gathered her papers and left the meeting without another word, her husband following behind her. The room erupted in conversation after she left. Several residents came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. Others expressed relief that the board had taken action. Robert Chen clasped my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Tom. Patricia needed to be held accountable." I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The past few months had been draining, and while I was glad the situation had been resolved, I couldn't help but feel some sympathy for Patricia. She had clearly started from a place of wanting to maintain the neighborhood standards, but somewhere along the way she had let the power go to her head. Jennifer was waiting for me when I got home. "How did it go?" Patricia was removed as board president. "Linda is the new president, and they're implementing new procedures to prevent this kind of thing from happening again." Jennifer hugged me. "I'm proud of you for not backing down. A lot of people would have just paid the fines or given up. I couldn't let her get away with it. Not just for me, but for everyone else she might target in the future." Life in Sagaro Heights settled into a calmer rhythm after Patricia's removal. The financial audit revealed some sloppiness in record-keeping, but no actual theft or misappropriation. Patricia remained on the board as a regular member but rarely spoke during meetings and eventually resigned in July, citing family obligations. Her replacement was a retired engineer named Donald Price, who took a much more measured approach to community governance. The new board under Linda's leadership proved to be reasonable and fair. They streamlined the violation notice process, created an appeals procedure for homeowners who disagreed with violations, and established regular open forums where residents could voice concerns before they escalated into formal complaints. My relationship with the HOA improved dramatically. But in late August, something unexpected happened. I received a call from a lawyer named Rachel Winters, who identified herself as representing Patricia Henderson. My stomach sank. Was Patricia suing me? "Mr. Kellerman, I'm calling to inform you that my client, Patricia Henderson, has filed a defamation lawsuit against you," Rachel said in a crisp, professional tone. "She alleges that you made false statements about her conduct as HOA board president, damaging her reputation in the community and causing her emotional distress." "I made truthful statements supported by documentation," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything I said at the board meetings was accurate and backed up by evidence. That will be a matter for the court to decide. You'll be receiving formal service of the lawsuit within the next few days. I'd recommend you obtain legal counsel." After she hung up, I immediately called Jennifer, who was at work. "Patricia is suing me for defamation." "What? She can't be serious," her lawyer just called. "I'm about to be served with a lawsuit." Jennifer was silent for a moment. "Okay, first, don't panic. Second, we need to get a lawyer. Third, you need to gather all your documentation again, because we're going to fight this." I spent the rest of the day researching defamation law in Arizona and looking for attorneys who specialized in HOA disputes and defamation defense. I found a lawyer named Marcus Reeves who had excellent reviews and experience with both areas. I called his office and managed to get an appointment for the next morning. Marcus Reeves was a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a reassuring demeanor. His office was in downtown Phoenix, and the walls were lined with law books and framed certificates. After I explained the situation and showed him the lawsuit documents I had been served with that morning, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Mr. Kellerman, I'm going to tell you something that's going to make you feel better. This lawsuit is completely meritless, and I suspect Miss Henderson's attorney knows it." "How can you be sure?" "Because truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Everything you said about Patricia Henderson was documented and proven. You have the violation notices she issued, your responses, the board's dismissals, the investigation findings, and witness testimony from other board members. You didn't make false statements. You presented facts. For a defamation claim to succeed, the plaintiff has to prove that the defendant made false statements of fact. Patricia can't meet that burden. So why is she suing? Marcus shrugged. Spite mostly. Some people can't accept when they've been held accountable, so they lash out. She probably thinks she can intimidate you into settling, or at least make your life difficult with legal expenses. It's called a SLAPP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. Arizona has anti-SLAPP statutes that allow defendants to get these cases dismissed quickly and recover attorney fees from the plaintiff. So what do? We file a motion to dismiss under Arizona's anti-SLAPP statute. We'll argue that your statements were made in a public forum regarding a matter of public concern, specifically HOA governance and board member conduct. We'll show that your statements were true and supported by evidence. And we'll ask the court to award you attorney fees because Patricia filed a frivolous lawsuit intended to silence you. Marcus was as good as his word. Within 2 weeks, he had filed a comprehensive motion to dismiss, including all my documentation and affidavits from Linda Martinez, Margaret Thompson, and Susan Chen attesting to the accuracy of my statements. The motion was nearly 50 pages long and methodically dismantled every aspect of Patricia's claims. Patricia's attorney filed a response, but it was weak and mostly consisted of arguing that Patricia's feelings had been hurt and her reputation damaged. There was no meaningful rebuttal to the evidence showing my statements were true. The court scheduled a hearing for late September. The hearing was held in Maricopa County Superior Court. Jennifer came with me for moral support, and Marcus exuded confidence as we took our seats at the defendant's table. Patricia was there with her attorney, looking nervous. The judge was a woman named Sandra Morrison, who had a reputation for not tolerating frivolous lawsuits. The hearing lasted about an hour. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that I had acted with malice and intended to damage Patricia's reputation, but Judge Morrison interrupted her. Counsel, intent is not the primary issue here. The question is whether the statements were false. I've reviewed the defendant's motion and the supporting documentation. Every statement Mr. Kellerman made about Ms. Henderson's conduct appears to be supported by contemporaneous records and witness testimony. Can you point to any specific statement that was factually false? Patricia's attorney fumbled through her notes. Your Honor, Mr. Kellerman characterized my client's actions as harassment and abuse of power, which are subjective characterizations. Characterizations based on documented facts, Judge Morrison replied. Miss Henderson issued 8 violation notices to Mr. Kellerman in 6 weeks, all of which were dismissed by the HOA board as unfounded. That pattern supports an inference of harassment. Mr. Kellerman's statements appear to be protected opinion based on disclosed facts. Unless you can show me a provably false statement of fact, I'm inclined to grant the motion to dismiss. Patricia's attorney had no response. Judge Morrison granted Marcus's motion to dismiss and awarded attorney fees to me, to be paid by Patricia. The amount was nearly $15,000, covering all of Marcus's fees and costs. As we left the courthouse, Patricia approached me in the hallway. Her attorney tried to stop her, but Patricia waved her off. I just want to say something to him. I braced myself for an angry outburst, but Patricia looked more tired than angry. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I let everything get out of control. I thought I was doing the right thing, maintaining standards, but I got so focused on being right that I forgot about being fair. The lawsuit was a mistake. I was angry and embarrassed, and I wanted to hurt you the way I felt hurt, but you were right and I was wrong. I was surprised by the apology. Patricia, I never wanted to destroy your reputation or hurt you. I just wanted to be treated fairly. I know. And you deserved that. I've done a lot of thinking over the past few months, and I realize I had become exactly the kind of person I used to complain about. I'm selling my house and moving out of Sagaro Heights. Too many burned bridges. She looked at Jennifer. You have a good man here. He stood up for what was right even when it would have been easier to just give in. Patricia walked away before I could respond, her attorney following behind her. Jennifer squeezed my hand. That was unexpected. Yeah, I almost feel bad for her. Don't. She made her choices, and she's dealing with the consequences. But at least she finally acknowledged what she did. We drove back to Gilbert in thoughtful silence. Marcus had warned me that winning the attorney fees award and actually collecting the money were two different things. But a month later, I received a check from Patricia's attorney for the full amount. True to her word, Patricia listed her house for sale in October and moved out by November. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she and her husband had relocated to Tucson. The rest of the year passed peacefully. The HOA under Linda's leadership functioned smoothly. Violation notices were rare, and when issued, were clearly warranted and handled professionally. The community actually started to feel like a community rather than a police state. The neighborhood Halloween party in October was well attended, and people seemed more relaxed and friendly. In December, Linda approached me at the community holiday gathering. Tom, I wanted to thank you again for what you did earlier this year. A lot of people were frustrated with Patricia's behavior, but didn't know how to address it. You showed everyone that standing up to unreasonable authority is possible and necessary. I just didn't want to pay thousands of dollars to replace a perfectly good roof that had been properly approved, I said with a laugh. It was more than that, and you know it. You held the board accountable, and that made all of us better. Actually, I wanted to ask you something. We have a vacancy on the board now that Donald Price is moving out of state. Would you be interested in serving? I considered it. The idea of being on the HOA board had never appealed to me, but after everything that had happened, I understood the importance of having reasonable people in those positions. Can I think about it? Of course. Talk it over with Jennifer. We'd be lucky to have you. That evening, I discussed the offer with Jennifer. What do you think? Should I join the HOA board? She laughed. 6 months ago, you would have said absolutely not, but I can tell you're actually considering it. I am. I mean, I saw firsthand how much damage one unreasonable person can do in that position. If I can help prevent that from happening again, maybe it's worth it. Then do it. Just promise me you won't turn into HOA Karen. I promise. No measuring grass height with rulers, no driving around looking for violations, and definitely no retaliating against people who disagree with me. I accepted Linda's offer and was appointed to the board in January. My first year on the board was educational and occasionally frustrating, but mostly rewarding. We worked on updating the CC and Articus. To make them clearer and more reasonable, implemented better communication systems, so homeowners knew what was happening in the community, and focused enforcement efforts on actual problems rather than petty aesthetic issues. The bronze-colored roof on my house continued to look great, weathering Arizona's intense sun and summer monsoons without any issues. Occasionally, new residents would ask me about the color, and I would tell them the story of Patricia Henderson and the importance of documentation and standing up for yourself. Most people found it amusing, though some were shocked that an HOA president could behave that way. Robert Chen moved to be closer to his daughter in California, but before he left, he came over for a farewell dinner. You know, Tom, when you first moved in, I thought you were just another person who would either fall in line with Patricia's demands or quietly move away. I'm glad I was wrong. What made you think I would fall in line? Most people do. It's easier than fighting. But you proved that standing your ground, backing up your position with facts, and refusing to be bullied actually works. You changed this neighborhood for the better. After Robert left, I stood in my driveway looking at my house. The bronze roof gleamed in the Arizona sunset, the color shifting between deep brown and reddish copper depending on the angle of the light. It was exactly what I had wanted when I planned the renovation, and I was proud that I had fought to keep it. Jennifer joined me outside, admiring your handiwork, just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, we were dealing with constant harassment from Patricia. Now I'm on the board. Things are running smoothly, and we actually like living here. It's amazing what happens when reasonable people are in charge, Jennifer said, slipping her arm through mine. We stood there for a while, watching the sun set over the desert landscape, feeling grateful for our home, our community, and the lesson that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. The roof that had caused so much trouble had become a symbol of standing up for what was right, and every time I looked at it, I was reminded that documentation, persistence, and a willingness to challenge unjust authority could make all the difference. The following spring brought new challenges and opportunities. A group of newer residents approached the board about installing solar panels, which had traditionally been discouraged by the HOA on aesthetic grounds. Given my experience with the roof controversy, I was particularly sensitive to homeowners wanting to make reasonable improvements to their properties. We worked with the residents to develop guidelines that allowed solar panels while addressing legitimate aesthetic concerns, creating a framework that balanced individual property rights with community standards. Linda stepped down as board president in April due to work commitments, and the board elected me as her replacement. I accepted with some trepidation, very aware of how Patricia's tenure had ended and determined not to repeat her mistakes. My approach was collaborative rather than authoritarian, seeking input from homeowners before making decisions, and always asking myself whether an enforcement action was truly necessary or just petty. The lessons from my conflict with Patricia informed every decision I made as board president. When a homeowner installed a fence that was 6 inches taller than the technically allowed height, instead of immediately issuing a violation notice, I visited the homeowner to understand why. It turned out their dog was an accomplished jumper, and the standard fence height wasn't sufficient. We worked out a compromise that addressed the safety concern while minimizing the visual impact. When another homeowner painted their front door a bright turquoise color that was definitely not on the approved palette, I remembered my own roof situation. The CC and Arctic specified earth tones for major exterior elements, but the front door was relatively small. Rather than force the homeowner to repaint, we brought the issue to the full board and decided that front doors could have more flexibility in color choices as long as they complemented the overall house color scheme. The turquoise door stayed, and several other homeowners took advantage of the relaxed policy to add personality to their homes. Throughout my time on the board, people would occasionally reference the Patricia situation as a cautionary tale about what happens when HOA leadership loses perspective. New board members were told the story as part of their orientation, not to embarrass Patricia, but to illustrate the importance of fair and consistent enforcement, proper documentation, and treating homeowners with respect rather than suspicion. My bronze roof remained a talking point in the neighborhood, but now it was a positive symbol rather than a source of controversy. when the roofing company that had installed it asked if they could use photos in their marketing materials. I agreed on the condition that they mention it had been approved by the HOA and permitted by the county. The company created a case study about the importance of proper approvals and working with HOAs, using my experience as an example of how to navigate the process correctly. 3 years after the initial conflict, I was preparing to step down from the board to focus on other priorities when I received a letter. It was from Patricia Henderson, postmarked from Tucson. I opened it with curiosity. The letter was handwritten on simple stationery. Patricia wrote that she had been in therapy working through her issues with control and perfectionism. She acknowledged that her behavior as HOA president had been toxic and damaging, not just to me, but to the entire community. She explained that losing the lawsuit and having to move had been devastating at the time, but ultimately it had forced her to confront aspects of her personality that needed to change. She wrote that she was in a better place now, both mentally and in terms of her living situation. Her new HOA in Tucson was much more relaxed, and she had deliberately avoided any leadership positions, preferring to just be a regular resident. She thanked me for standing up to her, saying that while it was painful at the time, it had ultimately set her on a path toward becoming a better person. The letter concluded with an invitation. Patricia and her husband were having a small gathering at their Tucson home and wondered if Jennifer and I would like to attend. It was clear from the tone that she wasn't expecting us to accept, but she wanted to extend the offer as a gesture of reconciliation. I showed the letter to Jennifer. "What do you think?" She read it carefully. "I think people can change, and it sounds like Patricia has done real work on herself. Whether you want to accept the invitation is up to you." I thought about it for several days. Part of me wanted to leave the past in the past, but another part appreciated Patricia's effort to make amends. In the end, I sent her a letter thanking her for reaching out and acknowledging her growth. I declined the invitation to the gathering, but I suggested that if she was ever in the Gilbert area, we could meet for coffee. It felt like the right balance between forgiveness and maintaining appropriate boundaries. Patricia responded a few weeks later, accepting my counteroffer and expressing hope that we might take me up on it someday. We never did meet for that coffee, but knowing that we had both moved forward from the conflict in healthy ways provided a sense of closure. As my term on the HOA board came to an end, I reflected on everything I had learned. The experience had taught me about the importance of standing up for yourself, the value of documentation, the need for reasonable people to engage in community governance, and the truth that power without accountability inevitably leads to abuse. It had also taught me about forgiveness and the capacity for people to change. The bronze roof on my house in Sagaro Heights still looks beautiful, a daily reminder that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, is always worth it. And somewhere in Tucson, Patricia Henderson is hopefully living a quieter, more balanced life, having learned the same lesson I did. That communities function best when people treat each other with respect, fairness, and a willingness to admit when they are wrong. Years have passed since those contentious HOA meetings, and life in Sagaro Heights has become everything we hoped it would be when we first moved in. The neighborhood is friendly, the board is reasonable, and people feel empowered to maintain their homes without fear of arbitrary enforcement. My story has become something of a legend in local HOA circles, occasionally referenced in discussions about board governance and homeowner rights. The bronze roof continues to protect our home through Arizona's harsh weather, its color still rich and vibrant, approved by the county, and a testament to the principle that when you follow the rules, document everything, and stand firm in the face of unjust authority. Justice usually prevails. And that is a lesson worth far more than the cost of any roof.